Welcome, everybody, to the Good Data Podcast. I'm your host, Drew Farnsworth. Today we have Christian Pearson on the program. Christian is a cultural critic and graduate of the University of Pennsylvania, and I wanted to have Christian on because I had this realization recently that in popular culture, the data center is the new hidden fortress. Like in movies and on TV, there's often this plot point that someone needs to break into a data center to steal a file or something. And I wondered why. Like, why is it that data centers are a symbol of value the way that banks used to be a symbol of value? And that launches us off into some pretty weird territory regarding data centers and science fiction in general. We realize that half of the Mission Impossible movies have some sort of a scene in a data center. But, of course, all of the data centers in these movies are heightened and look nothing like reality. Also, if you're worried that this won't have any technical discussions of data centers, not to worry. We have an oddly long discussion of data center water filtration, so stay tuned for that. Christian was a great guest, and I'm excited to share this conversation. Let's go. Christian Pearson, welcome to Good Data. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Glad to be on the show.
So today we're doing something a little bit different. We're talking about pop culture and how that relates back to data centers specifically, because that's sort of the cause for this whole podcast thing to exist. One of the most interesting things to me about data centers is that they're almost always there as a plot device to be broken into.
It's so funny. I never thought about that before. Like, I guess it's like the modern equivalent of like the bank or something like that, or the safety deposit box.
Yeah. It's like it's an impenetrable fortress that has something important in it. And because we live in the information age, it's the perfect sort of icon of information. So
well, that probably speaks to the fact that like information, like literally is such a commodity these days that like it really does have a lot of kind of economic importance tied to it. If you think about like, you already mentioned these companies, Google and Facebook, like really they're just companies that sell back information that they gather from their users.
Right. It's one of those things that it's just in terms of storytelling. Information is almost accidentally replacing money as a important piece of storytelling. That as stories get more technological, information becomes the commodity through which that story gets told.
Yeah, I also think it's probably easier to steal like a flash drive than it is like 10 pounds of cash.
But it's also funny because you know how the trope of heist movies is to crawl through a duct?
Yes.
Well, I've actually been in many, many ducts in data centers and similar buildings that are big enough that you can like walk through them. So it's not that far-fetched.
I was going to say, have you thought about like dropping down Tom Cruise style?
I've thought about it, yeah. I think it would be, it's almost something, I was actually commissioning a data center and I was in the return duct for a big air handler and it was like 30 feet above the ground. And I really thought about like just popping my head out and being like, have like a heist movie moment or like taking my camera and just getting a video as if I'm trying to break into the space.
I think it would have been worth it.
Well, that's why, that's why data centers are interesting from a story generation is that they are actually fortresses as well, or they're supposed to be. You know?
So, I was thinking about Tom Cruise, but I actually was thinking like data centers have like in the Mission Impossible series, starting from the first one, like data centers have like always been like really a key point of the story.
Yeah, exactly.
Of the action, actually.
Like literally, that scene in the first Mission Impossible was like so tense, and it was part of a data center or like a computer interface.
Yeah, and then there's another one. I can't remember if it was the most recent one, but it was like a center where they had to like I want to say it's like Ghost Protocol. Yeah, that's right.
I think you might be right. Yeah,
It's
but remind
it's
me.
one with Alec Baldwin. It's one with Alec Baldwin.
Yeah, and he has to like
Alec,
swim for a very long time. Is that the one?
yes, exactly. So it's like this water cooled system, and then part of it is that like he breaks into the system by swimming through the water ducts. Is there like anything in real life where that could be like 10% even could be like possibly feasible based on a real system out there?
That particular movie, I
Three
don't think
percent.
so. The weird thing is that the design of the water system was more akin to like a nuclear reactor, like a fusion reactor. It was not really like a what you would use for a cooling system, but water cooling is a big deal in data centers. It just doesn't look like that. Like I actually know somebody, and they had a system that would pull water in from the ocean and use that to cool the data center. So there was actually like this crazy like 50-foot tall, 50-foot wide filter that was on a wheel that would like as the fish got sucked in, it would sort of keep moving around like on a almost like a belt sander. It would just keep moving around this belt, this gigantic grate, and that would be more realistic than what was in that movie. Whatever that was just kind of to
What
look
happens
cool.
to what happens to the fish?
I think they die. I'm not sure, but there's some way to scrub it out. Yeah, they might. I think they definitely get shot with water and then
Yeah,
return to the ocean. But I don't know if they're fine afterwards or not. Like the the screen gets cleaned with water, and I'm sure some of the
probably,
fish
probably
are.
dead.
Yeah, some of them probably. And I don't know how they actually did it, but I just know that it's actually really hard to use water from like actual biological sources because biological sources like you would think that the salt water would corrode all the gears and infrastructure and everything, but it's actually also the living material like barnacles and
Yeah,
uh, shrimp or whatever would lay eggs that gets into all the systems and degrades it. And stuff it is like there's so many details to that kind of stuff that you don't necessarily think about. And actually, I bet seeing a giant screen that it goes around a wheel would actually be really good cinema. Like it would be kind of cool to see that and see how Tom Cruise would have to navigate that, like getting caught in this giant wheel. Like it could be really interesting.
yeah. That
But
or he gets caught and somebody sprays him like off and he falls into the ocean
yeah.
like a dead fish. Um, so I'm gonna have to like look this up.
All
Were
I
you not
know
allowed to share
is
that?
that that was an initial design, and that the actual they do that in nuclear power plants. They do that type of filtration.
Friends and I had a joke about Google having like a moon base on the dark side of the moon.
It could be.
I mean, it seems if anybody was to have like a villainous kind of like secret moon base, I think at this point you'd have to accept that it would be Google.
Yeah. I mean, given that their mission statement includes the term "Don't be evil," I think that there's a good chance that they are very evil.
Yeah, exactly. Because they know that they can do it. Like they know that they're like basically set up to be like a James Bond style evil corporation.
Right.
So if you have to remind yourself not to be evil, then that's a sign that you're pretty much evil.
Yeah, that's the thought. Yeah. It's funny too that it's always a monolithic, there's so many in movies, there's so many monolithic organizations uh, that they almost have to be nameless or the name doesn't matter. A, for like liability reasons, that they don't
Yes.
want to get sued for being too similar to a actual company, and
Yep.
B, because there's something very scary about a corporation that you don't know what it does. Does that make sense? Like, there's so many like weird conglomerates, or there have been so many weird conglomerates. It's like, oh, there could be some arm of this conglomerate that is poisoning babies or something, and we wouldn't have any idea. And even like the president of the company might not have any idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the other thing is too. It's like I think people in general just are concerned that like some of this information might be accidental, and it's not really even like information. I think it's the concern that like in the move towards progress that there might be these missteps or moral lapses that because there's no person at the center of the wheel kind of paying attention to the general progress of like society as like we relate to technology that like again it's like it's almost like it's easier when there's like somebody evil to point a finger at, but when it might just be like us collectively just kind of like going about our day and not paying attention, like that seems like that's actually a deeper fear, like a deeper rooted fear that people have. That like I guess it's like ultimately like life may have no meaning. Like it's easy to think that like oh like there's like a bad guy, right? There's got to be a bad guy at the end of the day. But the fact that like oh no, it might just be like a
It might be all of
circumstance.
us. Yeah,
Yeah, it might be all of us.
they're right. That's almost more nihilistic.
Yeah,
It's the feeling that like, oh, well, this is just inevitable. Somehow this system will emerge, and we can't do anything about it. It's just going to be some back room in a corporation, and even the CEO might not really understand it. But usually the CEO is the bad guy. Usually, I think.
yes. Usually
Like,
the CEO is that guy.
yeah. But
Uh,
personally, I almost feel like that's not as believable because I've known a lot of bumbling CEOs that didn't necessarily know, or I shouldn't say bumbling, but people who aren't aware of every day-to-day operation that's under their roof.
yeah, I mean, it's like even if like you are like on top of it, like I think there's a limit to how much one person can have an awareness about a corporation that's like hundreds of billions of dollars in size.
Yeah.
Like it's kind
But
of an impossible task, especially if you consider like a lot of these like technology information companies have like GDP that's like bigger than most nations.
you wonder you wonder if they have a lot of subsidiaries, and they have a lot of Alphabet, for instance, has a lot of pieces to it. So the Google portion is probably understood pretty well because that's mostly search, and they cut that out. But then they have like the X thing, and they have so many different pieces of their business, but so much the revenue comes from Google to pay for all this other moonshot stuff. So I wonder, I wonder if there is somebody in a back room that is doing something not necessarily intentionally nefarious, but is, I'll just throw it out there, accidentally coming up with a general AI that could take over the world. Like that to me is like the most likely scenario
Yeah,
for robots to come about, like a self-conscious AI to come about, is an accident that
yeah. That it's
they
just like some machine learning system that had that they were so focused on the machine learning aspect of it, they didn't think about like how sophisticated this machine might become.
right that you could layer all these different neural nets on top of each other and just kind of see what happens, and who knows what would happen.
Yeah, wasn't it like that computer like program that they had to shut down because like they were developing their own language and then the programmers couldn't understand what they were saying?
What's crazy about that? That's common. That's how they usually do it. Like I think that was a
Yeah.
Facebook article, but that when developing AI, especially communicative AI, that it often develops its own language because, especially if it's just talking to itself, it can find a more efficient way to talk to itself, which is kind of scary. Like, that in terms of teaching a computer how to play Go, it can play 10,000 lifetimes worth of Go in a couple days. And same thing can be true of language and all that. Yeah, I mean, the other big one that is a fear-mongering trope of science fiction is AI. So I think, there's a reason why it's scary, is that it could take over the world and really be harmful, but also it's the unknown, and they always give it kind of an anthropomorphized voice or something, or body, but
Yeah.
it's also just this very other, like, technological thing that is very foreign, and I think that's part of the reason why it's scary.
Yeah. Well, have you seen the movie Ex Machina?
Yeah, that was amazing.
Wasn't it? But that's actually like a really good movie too, because if I recall correctly, the company that ends up making the AI is actually kind of like a internet search marketing company, and one of the reasons that they select the character played by Donald Gleason is because they're able to look up his search history and find out that he's like the perfect person, and the robot in turn is like uh, designed to match what he would look for, I guess, in a romantic partner, so that he is particularly susceptible to the Turing test.
Right.
Uh, so it's like a kind of like funny case study as far as like pop culture is concerned, because it kind of like touches on everything that we're talking about, right? Which is like the idea that like you could have this like super sophisticated AI who becomes self-aware, but then armed with all this information that we're just kind of like throwing into the ether about ourselves, is that like a potential exposure? At the very least, it's something that like I think speaks to our anxiety about these new technologies and what they can mean for our future.
Yeah. Well, especially, kind of coupling machine learning with the amount of information that's out there. It's amazing how little information is necessarily needed when it's got the right algorithm behind it to identify a person.
Yeah.
Like gait analysis, like the way you walk is actually like a 99% accurate, or can be 99% accurate identifier. And then you look back at your location history, that's an incredibly good identifier, because it shows you where you've been. Like, you've been
Yeah.
to your house and you go to work, and boom, they know who you are. And, there's so many little pieces of personal information that we put out there that are now able to be combed and aggregated by these machine intelligence, or really just bots. I mean, it doesn't have to be
Yeah.
that intelligent, but the whole Cambridge thing, where that data was used to target people, to send them misinformation. I think that's one of the most likely scenarios in real life of
Yeah.
how really nefarious things are going to continue to happen, is that the that data is going to get combed and put together, and there's going to be some kind of system that targets people to tell them the exact story that they'll believe,
Yep.
which is already definitely happening, but it's pretty
Yeah.
messed up.
No, it's crazy. I was actually having dinner with a friend of a friend who worked in kind of like marketing analytics. And like I had no idea how sophisticated the information was that is collected about people, where it's like literally specific to the person. And then two, it's like that what was it? It was like CVS a couple of years ago, where like a woman, her parents found out she was pregnant because of the types of things that she was buying in the coupons that
Right.
she was given. Just like that level of specificity as far as like the algorithms are used, and then what they can kind of like hone in on about you from the information that they collect. But I say all that to say it's really crazy, because like as far as like the election was concerned, apparently like the biggest thing is that they convinced people to be inactive. So it was like the people who are on the fence either about Hillary or about voting in general, they were able to convince them through a targeted campaign to not act. And that part is like I think the scariest consequence. We're kind of like talking about like riling up as far as like the overall kind of like media discussion is concerned, but it seems like what happened is actually much more sinister, where it's like they kind of warped people's sense of reality, that they felt like they didn't have to participate in the democracy, or if they felt that there was like, I don't know, like there was an equality on both sides between like the craziness of Donald Trump and the rhetoric of Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing that there are so many different ways to influence an election.
Yeah,
Keeping people home is also influencing an election.
yeah,
And
and again, that there's like technology that's sophisticated to do that.
yeah, well, and Facebook even like did they do their weird sort of scientific experiments on people who use Facebook,
Yep.
where they had one that was they sent a message to a certain population that said, "Hey, go out and vote," and another population who didn't, they didn't send that to, and then they somehow tracked it. I believe I might be making up that specific one, but there was some sort of get out the vote effort that they tracked, and they knew that they made a difference, but it's also a little bit shady that they're experimenting on normal people. Today's episode is brought to you by Green Lane Design. Green Lane has been designing, engineering, and building critical facilities for over 10 years, including major enterprise customers as well as co-location facilities. GLD has designed and developed an integrated stack of design disciplines. If you would be interested in a free assessment, go to greenlanedesign.com, click on Contact, and mention the podcast.
Well, the other thing is too, I remember I think it was like a Radio Lab or something like that. They were talking about like Facebook and specifically, I think it's like a part of their like push unit or what would be a push unit in like another context where they had all these sociologists and they're like, hey, like we have like the sophisticated tool of Facebook that we're used to using for selling marketing, but like we want to use it for social good too. Like what are the things that like you think would be effective as far as studies are concerned? And so the thing that was kind of mind-boggling to these sociologists is that like they're used to like most sociology studies are like done on a handful of people. They're getting like what they not even assume, but like what their best approximation of a significant size of the population. But generally speaking, it's only a few thousand people, as opposed to Facebook, which has the ability to tap into like millions of people. It's like, do you want to like, we can pull information from, I don't know, how much of the human population is like on Facebook? Like not just like, the population of like college kids who like need $5 and are
Right.
like want to get a free lunch, like literally the whole human population.
Right. Yeah, like half of every human, half
Yeah.
of all the humans.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, statistically, that must be so exciting as a statistician to be like, oh, well, we don't have to worry in some ways about getting a sample size because we're talking about the entire population of people. It's like, you almost don't have to do the math on it because you just have everybody. I mean, it's not quite like that because I'm sure people hold back and there's other statistical tricks they have to do, but it's kind of, I don't think that's ever been the case, except unless you're looking at like census data, but census data is only once every 10 years. It's not like it's every
Yeah.
day or every hour.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And like the census is so unique too that like even like as far as like something that America started, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about the show Black Mirror.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'd seen a couple episodes, but all the sort of sinister tech pieces that go into that show. There's a lot that has to do with memory and socialization and I guess control, like government control. But like, what do you think? There's definitely themes. So what are the themes that you see in that show, and why do you think they're themes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As far as like themes in the show, well, certainly, like you said, memory is a big part of that show. I'd also say just identity too. There seems to be like a bunch of episodes where the nature of reality. So I'm thinking specifically of any episode. And there's been a few where they talk about downloading a copy of somebody's personality onto the the web essentially, and
Right.
a lot of those episodes, and there's been more than one. I think there's at least three I can think of. There is the Christmas special, which is like I think pretty well known, where John Hamm shows up as like it's like part of a prison sentence where you like get your brain downloaded and have to like relive the worst moment of your life, um, like hundreds and thousands, or at least until eternity. And then there's another one where there's a bunch of them. And so anyway, it seems that like one of the big issues that the show is addressing is that as we interface with technology and we have like artificial intelligence that like not only is like equal to our own but can like totally kind of like approximate someone's experience and someone's consciousness, like what does it really mean to be human? And besides that, like morally, what responsibility do we have to something that is maybe not human in the sense that they have a body, but as far as faculties are concerned, like mirror any person you can find on the street, which I think is kind of an interesting question that's like uniquely explored in that show.
Yeah. It comes down to personhood and identity, and what does it mean to be a person? Like, there's this sort of age-old question: if there was a conscious android, would they have human rights, or would they be
Yeah.
extended the same rights as people? And
But
sorry,
it's kind
again.
of no. I was going to ask your thoughts about it because I think it's actually even something more nuanced in that too. Because I think we, through however many years of science fiction, are used to the idea of like a robot and whether or not a robot has rights. But even just like a collection of data that
Yeah,
amounts to a consciousness, like what rights does that have, and what does
right.
that mean? Where like
Well,
there's no physical aspect to it really.
right. Yeah. I mean, there's already a lot of bots out there that are doing very complicated things, especially related to the stock market, that are very intelligent, that are self-perpetuating and don't just live on one server, but are moved around. I mean, uh, you talk about a computer virus that spreads. It has
Yeah.
its own sort of autonomy to move around to different nodes and users. Those things have a lot of the hallmarks of life. Not to say that they're there yet, but you could imagine that something that we just think of as a bug, as a computer bug, um, is important in some way. And maybe it's you don't call it alive, but you have to realize that there's some kind of uh, import to it, and it's not just something that should be thrown away. Maybe not a computer virus, but something along those lines.
Yeah.
Like there's more and more of an ability now for a program to move from one computer to another to another to another. In fact, they do that constantly these days. That it's not like a computer program sits here in Philadelphia and then moves to San Francisco. Or you don't have to move the box to move it from San Francisco. You can have a virtual server that is backed up in San Francisco and will spin up automatically if the one in Philadelphia fails. So it, it's like they have more computer programs have more actual autonomy than they ever did. So it's a little creepy already, I
Yeah.
think. Not to, I mean, it's all sort of science fictiony, and of course I'm not really creeped out because I understand all the back end of it, and it's not like this is nefarious in any way, but there's also something where you can see the trajectory of how things have changed,
Yeah.
which is a little creepy.
Yeah, and there's like an accidental like aspect to how sophisticated it is, and that
Yeah,
like it's kind of like mirroring life because it has like a, well, I mean, it makes sense, right? Because it's like, what's the term that necessity is the mother of invention?
Yeah.
And so like if you need to recreate, which is essentially like a life problem, which is like, okay, it's like I have like information that I need to propagate. Like, why wouldn't that look like a virus, which looks like a virus that like exists in the biological world, or why wouldn't it look like, I don't know, like the mating or the like a single cell organ? I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I guess I never had realized how sophisticated things were already without having consciousness. That's not really.
Yeah. I in some ways, like there is already enough computing power in the globe
Yeah.
to I think to have human level of consciousness. It's just not all working together. That there's so much even that's just going into just stupid algorithms like I mean stupid as in they're not actually producing useful work, but
Yeah.
like Bitcoin and things like that. Like there's so much that is possible to do with computers that in some ways it's like out of that could legitimately emerge some kind of consciousness. And I definitely think that it could come out of Wall Street or something where somebody is making money off of an algorithm that the more you make money off it, the more you're going to put resources to it. And the more you put resources to it, probably the better it gets, but also the more that it can get out of control. So I think that, in terms of a movie that I would want to make, I'd be interested to hear like, a Wall Street trader who accidentally creates something that ran amok. Because I do think like it would be an accident.
How do we know that's not already happening?
Have you ever seen the movie Primer?
Yes, I have seen Primer.
I like that movie a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the things I like about it, it's about these two guys who, it's kind of a spoiler, but they make a time machine by accident. And I think that's such an interesting premise. And I definitely think that's how it would actually happen, is that somebody is trying to do something. And in this case, it's in a garage, but in reality, it could be in some lab someplace where they're doing something very strange, and it just happens to have some unintended consequence that ends up being the feature that you actually want.
Yeah. I mean, how true that just is in general of like invention too, is that like a lot of things are done by accident.
Yeah. I mean, the classic example is penicillin. That was an accident to leave something out, and it started to grow mold.
The chocolate chip cookie, but yeah,
chocolate chip cookies is good too. I actually forget the story of chocolate chip cookies, but
I think they were trying to make like a chocolate cookie, and then thought that they could do that by like just like adding chunks of chocolate.
Oh, see,
yeah, I don't think it was a very smart person who created the chocolate chip cookie, but like at least we got the chocolate chip cookie.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I kind of like always imagined it as like a just like kind of like a like kind of drunk house mom who's like, yeah, we just threw some chocolate. And,
but making chocolate cookies. Wait, what are these chips doing still?
Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got you off track.
No, I wasn't. Yeah, there's no track to this. This is an off track.
Yeah.
It's an off track experience. But also, one other show. Do you watch Mr. Robot?
So I started Mr. Robot, but I haven't watched it recently.
I haven't watched it recently either.
Like,
it's one that
watched like 3.
Yeah, it was one that I really appreciated and was really good. It got very dark sometimes, and sort of went in too many circles, and was a little bit too self-referential, but I still appreciated it. I liked it. But that was another one where they actually had to go to a data center and actually break into a data center, and data centers were so central to it.
I do remember that episode because that's like the end of the first season, right? Where they like hack into the
And so it was like this whole thing where, okay, we got to destroy this part, but we also have to destroy the tapes, and we got to, the backup tapes, and we got to destroy like all these different levels of things at the same time, so they could make sure that the financial data was all corrupted or ransomware right at the exact same time, which is pretty much how you would have to do it. And they kind of went 2 levels deep, and from my knowledge of financial institutions, they would have had to go a few more levels to actually get everything. But it was one of those shows that really did think about the actual physicality of technology, which I thought was really cool. That you don't see that very often.
In the sense that like these like all this information's tied to like these like redundant data centers somewhere in the world.
Yeah, because they had to do it in actually literally they went to Ashburn, Virginia. They land in Dulles and take a car to Ashburn, Virginia, and that is where like the majority of or the biggest sort of data center hub in the world is in Ashburn, Virginia, because it sort of grew up organically, but the power was cheap and it was close to the government, and so all these government contracts went there. And also everybody else kind of followed that. So that area of Ashburn, Tyson's Corner, like that piece of Virginia is this hotbed of data centers. So they actually, in the show, go there, and then they have to, they have the backup, which is in a place called Steel Mountain or something, which is totally just means Iron Mountain, which is a backup storage place that is in real life. And then they have to destroy the tapes that are in China, and it's like this whole like, oh, they actually did think about this. they were like, oh yeah, we know what a data center is, and we know what programming is, and is it in its own way it was a heist movie because they had to break in and do the ransomware. But I don't know. Did you like it kind of did fall off the rails a little bit, but just in terms of the realism of it, like did it feel accurate to you, or was it like?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I think like I don't have like a basis of comparison as far as like what the real world equivalent would be, but as far as like, I don't know, making me, I think it, I don't, so I'm just trying to think. It's like, as far as like realistic was concerned, sure, but like for me, it was like, I think it was kind of just like things that I didn't think about.
Yeah.
As far as like, I guess that's like every TV show or bank heist, you're like, oh man, that must be how they do it, and that's how like people become kind of like armchair experts on things that they've mostly experienced through movies. But I would say, regardless if it's true or not, it felt like it was thought out, and then being thought out, like had a level of what, I don't know, maybe it's just like the appearance of reality that was like definitely as a viewer something different. Where it's like you said, it's like the fact that they were thinking about like the redundancies and everything, as opposed to like, handled by like a less skilled TV show showrunner. I forget who the showrunner is, but I think he's like married to.
I think his name is Sam Esmail.
Yes.
Sam Esmail,
yeah. But yeah, if it was handled by somebody less sophisticated, I think it would have like been basically, oh, they go in and they hack into the system using, I don't know, a dog with a radio collar on it, something silly like that.
Well,
a cake. It'd probably be a cake.
It's funny, like, when you're crafting a narrative, it's very difficult to balance how much is like just made up and how much is based in fact. And some people really put a lot of time and effort into basing something in fact, but then that really hampers them in terms of making something that's really dramatic and interesting. because sometimes real life is very boring. Um,
Well, it's also how
but
do you like translate like all these redundancies too that are like mostly happening invisibly like via wires or cables or air and radio connections.
right, right. It's like literally invisible. When these things switch over, you see nothing.
Yeah.
At best, you see like a blip on a screen. Um, and that's one of the things that I think is most annoying about depictions of technology on screen. Ever since like the movie Hackers, where they had a like three-dimensional fly-through of a computer, or
Yeah.
in Jurassic Park
Lawnmower.
where they had a three-dimensional depiction of like a file system. It's like they have to make some way to make it visual, but it's very rarely like it looks hokey a lot of the time, or at least especially it did in the
Yeah.
90s. It's got a lot better, I think. Um, in Hollywood, it's like actually a big, really sought after job to design the computer system, like the screens that are on computer systems in a show or a movie, um, which I think is probably a interesting job. You're sort of like making a computer system um, for a movie. You're making it up, but it,
Like making some like completely fake thing.
yeah, exactly. And I almost feel like they could just have like a Linux desktop. Like, why does it need to be fake? Like,
Yeah, and that'd actually probably work enough for like most people.
yeah, like a lot of times they want to make it very visual and exciting, um, but sometimes just like these days, a regular screen is pretty visual and exciting. There's a lot going on. Um, I don't know. It, I think, there's going to be a lot more technological shows on TV because of how much it's a part of our lives. Like almost every show has somebody on a cell phone looking at Facebook these days. It's
Yeah.
ubiquitous, almost to the point of being weird. That the sort of line in a sitcom of "Get off your phone, kids,"
Yeah.
has replaced like stop watching TV, kids." Um,
Totally.
is that
Well,
sorry?
I
Go ahead.
think no. I was just gonna say too. Like, I wonder if like I'm like blinking out, but I think that like it's strange because like I mean they used to say the same thing about like the novels. And that's a conversation we had like last week too, right? When you're
Yeah,
here, is that like there's always been this kind of issue between like people getting used to new technologies, but then like what does that mean with like our conception of like the real like I don't know, phones just like maybe we're just old. Maybe we're just
yeah,
old and like phones are like the new thing, but like in the grand scheme of things, like people are gonna be fine.
right. Well, I think that a lot of times there's like a boogeyman of
Yeah.
oh, this technology is going to make everything worse. And then it's an interesting, somewhat open question as to what would the world be like without those technologies? Would it be better or worse? Uh, but the especially like I some of it does bother me, and I don't want my daughter to like be glued to her phone.
Yeah.
I have to like realize that it's going to happen, but I don't have to be happy about it.
Yeah,
Like,
man, I totally understand that. I just like again, I think about like people making the same complaint about the novel,
yeah,
like literally saying that it's going to corrupt people's brains and lead them to be like totally physically like atrophied or whatever. And like how I don't, and I'm sure to a certain degree that probably is true, but I don't know why like this new thing of technology seems like particularly bad and to me. So it's like
yeah.
I don't know if that's again just like me like kind of being old or like and well again you have a kid so like what do you kind of like what's her reaction to kind of being on her phone and having access to all these different things?
Well, we keep it away from her pretty well.
Yeah.
She when she's watching TV, she's glued to the TV, or like the few times that she's had an iPad in her hand, like she's glued to it. She can't even look away. She's like, She just wants it so bad. I have like a Star Wars augmented reality app on my phone,
Yeah.
so she can like drag in like an X-wing or something
But
to put it in the world, and she's played with that for hours. She's like, I want to watch the robots. I want to watch the robots. And like I can't take it away from her. It's
yeah.
she loves it, and it's not even like a game or anything that's really immersive, but she just can't stop. And I think if I had had that when I was a kid, I wouldn't be able to stop either. And then I think of like how great it was to play outside and run around and play tag, and it's like I don't as long as technology doesn't take away that, like as long as kids still play in the dirt, and as long as like you still have a physical connection to the world and you're not just wearing a VR headset all day, I think it's fine. But there's like with so many things, there's a limit. There's a both and. It's like yes, let's do this, but also let's do that. Like um let's not lose the tactile nature of reality.
Yeah,
That's
no, totally. I
yeah.
mean, I think that's like a really good kind of question. And I'm also kind of thinking too, like, so like you have like a daughter here, like you guys like really try to limit her technology exposure. Like, how does that compare when she's with somebody who has like a little bit more exposure to that technology? Like, does that become an issue? I mean, obviously she's pretty young, so it's not like she's missing out yet. But I guess my question is like, if you try to raise a kid who has like limited technology exposure, um, like what does it mean when they go into like a school environment, and how does that like affect how they even like relate and communicate to like their friends, their other students, like
Yeah, I think once she's old enough for Instagram, all bets are off. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
it's she's going to have to there's going to be so much pressure for her to be into all that stuff that I don't think we're going to be able to stop her from that. And maybe we shouldn't, I mean that's the way that people communicate, and I get that. But for right now, man, I want to I want to make sure um that she develops within her brain, as much as possible, the uh, physical reality, the presence. Like, I mean, my argument for a lot of this stuff is that it's so helpful for me personally to be present in a given situation, to not be distracted, and that so much of media and social media and phones and everything is all about distracting us and taking our attention and bringing our attention into this little, you know, 6-inch diagonal block in our hands. Like,
Yeah.
it, I do think that's not ideal. That that it's not bad to some extent, but just the amazing draw of it. Like for myself personally, I set my phone to grayscale instead of color so that I'm not as enticed, because the bright colors on screens are
Yeah.
very alluring to the brain. So setting it to black and white, I've actually noticed my use of the phone goes down a lot. Like I don't stay on it as long.
Yeah.
So any little tricks like that, I take. You know, I want her to have that too.
Yeah, like
Um,
a certain level of sobriety from like technology.
yeah, like a healthy sobriety.
Yeah.
Take a couple drinks, maybe have a good weekend, but don't drink every day.
Well, I mean, I don't know what this means for your future listeners, but I think about that even in the context of like podcasts, where it's very rare that I leave myself alone with my own thoughts now, which is like
Yeah,
definitely something that I'm aware of and is probably a bad thing. But it's just so easy to have like, a conversation that I have like some really interesting podcasts about some like things that I'm curious about, how to just kind of like put that on in my quiet moments, which is great to have that piece of information. But then I think, well, I've kind of robbed myself of the moments just to kind of like mull over thoughts and let things that may not have naturally come into my head just kind of like flow, to let kind of like the passage of ideas kind of like circle in and out.
Yeah. Well, I think I agree with that. I think, boredom is a fantastic tool and teacher. And, um, so many of my best ideas have come out of just abject boredom. And I'm not bored too much anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I have a constant entertainment in my pocket, and it's very rare that I feel. Sometimes I feel overstimulated or annoyed, but that's not the same as boredom.
No.
It's not the same as like staring someplace and letting your thoughts loose. And you're right. I think that's a loss. So I try sometimes I try and meditate and do that kind of stuff for myself,
Yeah.
but I don't know if it's the same thing. I think
Yeah.
maybe,
Well, no, I
sorry,
was
go
just
ahead.
gonna say it's weird to like say that you need to like invite boredom into your life, but there's probably these level of truth to it.
Well, yeah, I think boredom is actually a good thing. Um,
No, 100%.
but but at the same time, I hate being bored.
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable feeling, and like
Yeah,
everybody likes to be stimulated, but there is, I guess, like a self. I was gonna say self stimulation. I had to stop myself, but yeah, it's like yeah, you can kind of entertain yourself, and then
yeah,
entertaining yourself is like you said, it's like the gateway to a lot of like creative ideas.
right. Well, and a lot of the back to Black Mirror and all the depictions in pop culture of the current moment of computers, a lot of it has to do with addiction and this feeling that
Yeah.
we are stuck and glued to our devices. Um, I wonder, do you think that's true? Do you think that there is an internet addiction or
Oh yeah.
like a computer addiction?
I totally think I'm addicted to my device. Well, it's in the sense of like how many times have you had like that ghost ring or that ghost like the phantom like buzz? You're like, oh my god, did somebody text me? Is like, have I got an alert? Like, what is it? I need to like find out what it is.
Yeah.
Um, or yeah,
Well, it's happened to me. It's happened to me
yeah,
where I think I feel a buzz and then I put my hand down to find it and my phone's in the other pocket.
yeah.
So nothing happened. Yeah.
No, I think it's just like I think everybody's a little addicted in the same way that like like we have an obesity epidemic because like really tasty bad for you food is like super available. I wouldn't be surprised if like a large portion of the population, if not a majority of the population, kind of like is on the worst side of just a unnatural, unhealthy connection and preoccupation with technology, specifically like all these like phones and stuff like that.
Yeah. And the more that we make them beautiful and the more that we make incredible content for them, the harder it is to get away.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But then also too, like the fact that those things are like uh, pretty heavily tied to social engagement too. It's like you think about like
Right.
Twitter and like what's trending on Twitter is like knowing that is like super important.
Right.
Um, and like affects like uh, how you connect to um, other people and how you socialize if you don't know what's going on. It's usually you know what's going on by like being connected.
Right. No, it's true. And it's true both face-to-face socialization, but it's
Yeah.
also true in socialization that happens with your online self. That it's sort of like it's important to uh, be on the cutting edge of whatever's happening on Twitter, especially on Twitter or especially on Facebook. Whereas I think it's a little bit less important to be up on the newest, latest, greatest thing when you're speaking to somebody face to face.
Yeah, that's true. There's a little bit of a tail on that end, but I think it's still kind of surprising. Like, in as much as like there is a gap by that, it's like it's certainly not what it was 5 years ago, even.
Yeah, totally.
I mean,
It's
yeah, look
weird.
at the president, right? The president's number one method of communication, period, is Twitter.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like at a moment's notice, there's some news item that happens 24/7. It's kind of it is so it's so hard to escape, and it's so addictive. Like I you know am interested when I see a presidential tweet, or I can't look away sometimes. And I think it's not just that; it's the 24-hour news cycle. It's so many things. They're so damn entertaining. Like not in a oh I want to see this, but oh I can't look away. So much of the world right now is oh I can't look away because something crazy is going to happen.
Yeah, it's like a little bit of a train wreck mentality.
Yeah.
Which I actually think there's like a Black Mirror about too. There's like the teddy bear or something like that who like ends up being a political candidate, but just because the controversy and like the crazy thing that he is gonna say becomes like compelling enough.
Right. It's it's amazing how some things in science fiction really do prefigure what's happening in real life.
You know, including President Camacho. There's
Yeah,
a reference to Idiocracy, which is a great movie.
that is a pretty great movie. Yeah, one that I haven't seen in a while, but I think there's a lot of great things about it. But it's also kind of like this weird thing of all the intelligent people stop having kids, and it almost feels like eugenicist. It's a weird movie.
Yeah.
But especially in terms of what it had to say about the dumbing down of society, it does feel prescient.
Yes.
Um,
Definitely. Well, yeah, certainly in the sense that like the that people are just as interested in somebody who has like, well, yeah, I guess it's like style over substance, and it's prescient in the sense that like people like go for the flashier thing as opposed to like the measured thing that might be a more considered solution to whatever social ilms that they're like actually feeling.
right.
Like
Well,
for like yeah. Anyway, get
no. I mean, it's tough not to get um, a little bit depressed about some of this stuff. Because I mean, the other hard part is that talking about how great technology can be is not as good for storytelling. Like saying,
Yep.
"Oh my gosh, technology has really democratized education, where people can go online and get free classes for things that they never would have ever heard before.
Yep.
They can go on YouTube and learn about quantum physics, and they never ever would have been able to learn that without getting a college degree or being at a university. And the fact that we can conduct international trade, and we can have teams that span the globe, and there's so much that is incredible and fantastic about technology, but it's so much easier to tell the negative story.
So, do you think that though is like a more representative of like whatever the pessimism exists in the zeitgeist, as opposed to something that's inherently true of like storytelling? Because there's like the dichotomy of there's a dichotomy too of like Star Trek, right? Which Star Trek has always been at its core something about um, the ability of technology to expand the frontiers of like human experience. And there's like cool things like the communicator, which is like the forerunner to the cell phone, or the basically like technology like is very rarely the bad guy in any of those episodes. And if anything, it's kind of like this building blocks that shows that like, oh my God, like the future is like this incredible place where we've developed all these things and we've like literally solved all these problems as far as like human suffering is concerned. We've created this egalitarian society. And we've used technology to do it. And so like, and no, it's just kind of an interesting counterpoint. And again, it makes me think that like, oh, is the issue really the storytelling, or it's just that people do not want to be optimistic about technology.
That's a good point, because that really was uh, the technology was never, or was sometimes, the driver of the conflict, but was often the solution to the conflict. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes there was like an android who had gone amok or something, but often, they would use like the transporter to save somebody or something. It was there was this sense that technology was a savior. Um, but the conflict would then, in general, come from politics and the difficulties between whatever the Klingons and the Federation. Like, there was the driver of conflict in those stories was just happened to not so much be technology a lot of the time, which is a good point. Like, there is a certain techno optimism that is, realistic and good. And have you ever read any of the books of Cory Doctorow, Little Brother, or Pirate Cinema?
Not at all.
Okay, he's cool. He's one of the editors of the blog Boing Boing. But
Okay.
he has a very optimistic version, in some ways, of technology. Like, I'll say realistic, but that maybe not optimistic, but it very much points to the ways in which free and open technology would be good for the world, and the ways in which free and open technology is suppressed. That, things like copyright and the Digital Millennium Copyright Act kind of suppress all the good things that open source and the open internet allow. They're very esoteric books sometimes, but they're also young adult books a lot of the time. It's very, very weird.
What's the author's name?
Cory Doctorow. He's an interesting guy. Kind of I don't know if he's quite a techno anarchist or something, but a smart guy. He does a lot of speaking and is very much on the side of people should own what they have instead of licensing it. Most of the things that you own, anything that has a chip in it, is actually licensed because they own the code inside it, which means that you can't open it up and tinker with it because of that Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which is kind of a crazy law that I'm not a fan of, probably because of reading his work. But
yeah,
it's weird. Actually, did you hear about the John Deere problem?
No.
That like farmers bought these John Deere tractors, but they have computer systems in them that have to be serviced by John Deere technicians, because John Deere wanted to make more money off of servicing their products.
Got it.
But farmers have a long history of just fixing their own shit. they take care of it. So now they're not able to do that, and because the John Deere keeps invoking this Digital Millennium Copyright Act of DMCA, of saying, oh, you don't have the right to repair this. And so there's a movement for right to repair, for the ability to actually repair. Like, if you own something, it should be yours. But technically, something like a tractor, you can get sued for just fixing it.
Well,
it's kind of crazy. Yeah,
it's insane. Yeah. But I guess it makes sense too if you have what amounts to hundreds of millions of tractor equipment. That's lost revenue for the company if they don't pursue that legally.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they make money off of it. They're not. They know what they're doing, but it still feels like, that license shouldn't extend to the entire truck or tractor. That the licensing should just be the chip itself, or really that if you can break the licensing, you should be allowed to, because
you owe the thing.
Yeah, you own the thing. You should be able to repair that thing, and you know, some of the digital rights management goes too far. Like it just doesn't. It's backwards. I don't know. I feel like we've been talking for a while, and I'm sorry, I didn't have an exact theme for talking to you today, but I just wanted to.
Stuff.
Yeah, it is fun. But I feel like I should probably let you go. But I wondered if you wanted to.
It's a good time because like literally my computer's on 7% battery, and I'm like fumbling around with both hands. But again, it's been a good conversation. Anyway, I'm interrupting.
No, but I was wondering, do you have any like thing that you wanted to plug, or if you wanted to put out your social media or some of your art that you would want to share?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on Instagram at Cearson. That's CEERSON. It's really just silly pictures of my doodles and stuff like that. But hopefully I'll use that to put some of my art out there. So that's
Nice.
my only plug right now.
No, it's good. It's a lot more fun to just throw out crazy random sci-fi theories than it is to do some of my normal work about data centers. So I appreciate the diversion.
Do this again.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's fun. Thank you for talking.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's it for Good Data. Thank you for listening. I'd like to thank Christian Pearson and our sponsor, Green Lane Design. If you're interested in that free diagnostic, then please visit greenlanedesign.com and let them know that you listen to the podcast. For Good Data, I'm Drew Farnsworth. I'll talk to you next time on the podcast.